right, good morning or noon. We still have some folks coming in, but we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Adrienne Lalli Hills. I am a senior interpretive planner at the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art. And this lectern is in the way, making me nervous, so I'm going to use my teacher voice and my karaoke experience to just stand up and talk to you guys. I'll be moderating today's panel, which is titled Risky Business, Cultivating a Courageous Institutional Culture. My colleague Melissa and then Samir and Nina and Christine, I'll let them all introduce themselves, but have all worked at projects both at the Nelson Atkins and the Hirshhorn that happen to be audio-based. But something to keep in mind is that while we're talking about a specific type of interpretive media, we're really talking about that process of taking risks and failing and succeeding and carrying that over into other types of projects. So we hope that it expands beyond just the platform that we're talking about and more about this ethos of risk-taking. So Nina's going to share a little bit about why she convened this panel and some of the similarities and differences between the Nelson Atkins and Hirshhorn projects she saw.
It's not working.
Uh-oh.
There
we go. I'm Nina Callaway from Antenna. And yes, when we were thinking about this panel and about risky business, we really wanted to bring together, oh dear. Anyway, we really wanted to, we thought about bringing these two clients together because institutions have really different relationships to risk. Risk means a really different thing depending on your budget, your audience, your collection, your messaging. And so these are two institutions at different ends of the spectrum in terms of the size of budgets of the projects, where the internal culture started, where it got to. But at the end of the day, the approaches to mitigating that risk had a lot in common. And so we hoped that by looking at these two rather different projects and institutions, that it would give some tips that were sort of broadly applicable to the field at large. Oh, and I'll also just say that, as Christine was pointing out, like, all projects are inherently risky. Like, you can't really have a creative project without risk.
So as we were meeting through Skype and other online formats to prepare for this session, we had a lot of fruitful conversations that I wish we could have just recorded and then played for you, because it'd probably be a lot better. And really, it just led to a series of questions that we had. And we thought that it'd be really important from the outset to really define what we mean by risk. And we found that that's such a slippery term. Risk is super relative to the type of project, the type of institution you're in, and the context in which you find yourself. So we did the classic high school valedictorian style definition of risk from Merriam-Webster, a situation involving exposure to loss of reputation, resources, or value, which in the art museum world, we are very sensitive to what people think of us. So, as are all, but I feel like we're hypervigilant. And then we also thought about risk in the terms of often being adversarial. So we also made many nerdy references to the board game Risk, which is probably not a healthy way to think of projects with your colleagues. So we're going to start off with Christine and Melissa profiling a project they did at the Nelson Atkins. And before you guys begin, please introduce yourselves and your titles.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. I'm Melissa Mair. I am also a senior interpretive planner at the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art. So Adrienne and I got to work together on this project of the Block Gallery's opening, and also with the lovely Christine.
That would be me. Hi, I'm Christine Murray. I'm a senior creative strategist at Antenna International, and this was my favorite project that I did last year.
So we're going to talk to you about a reinstallation we did in our permanent collection of the block galleries, and this is a collection of impressionist art that we received from a local collector, and we were able to sort of really reimagine these galleries, and we, as part of this installation, adapted a new platform for audio called Detour.
Oh, that's it? Yeah, okay. So, I'm confused about where we are. Okay.
So just a little bit of background for you guys. Like I said, this is a reinstallation of our permanent collection, and we really felt like this was an opportunity for our institution to sort of be thinking about what we wanted the interpretation to look like within a permanent collection, because our work is typically revolves more around featured exhibitions, and so we were really excited to kind of get our hands on a permanent collection and think about how can we incorporate tech and sort of the most up-to-date interpretive strategies within our permanent collection. And at the time, we sort of had a decade of kind of conversations about wanting to do more innovative things, collaborating with our colleagues. We had really built sort of a strong relationship of trust. So we really felt like this was the time to seize the moment. We had kind of been building our institutional culture, and we saw this as an opportunity that we just had to reach out and grab and take, and that we couldn't lose it. So that's a little bit of background on this project.
I'm not talking.
Oh, right. Sorry, this is
Sorry, guys. So for this one, the risk factors for us was basically our donor told us, I actually would like to see this gallery before I die, which previously he had not cared. And actually didn't want to give us the works until after he had died. And then he was like, no, never mind. And he's 93. So we were like, wow, okay, we really have to get this open. So we did not have a lot of time. We only had 6 months, so we felt like we had to go big or go home. And as part of this project in the short timeline, we were working with many outside vendors. So not just Antenna, but we were also working with Detour, with Barkley, with outside evaluators to get all of this going. So we had a lot of moving balls and kind of things up in the air at the time. And the tech was brand new. Detour, kind of SF MoMA, had just recently used. We were the second museum to go on the platform, so it was brand new. And the Wi-Fi wasn't installed, so we couldn't test. The picture at the bottom you see is the space, how it looked as we were starting and working on the project. So yeah, there was a lot going on.
my turn. Okay. Hi. Sorry. We really do have a plan about who's talking when. I just forgot what it was. So I wanted to talk a little bit on the risk side of things. I got to walk into this great space that the museum had institutionally already decided that they were going to make this leap, and then I got to be one of the people that got to help them with this brand new kind of interpretive strategy, which was creating a bunch of immersive walks that were very different than a conventional audio guide. And so the risk that I was dealing with, the risk factors that I was dealing with, was trying to get the curatorial staff, while the interpretive staff and all the people that were my colleagues to create the project, there were a whole lot of other stakeholders at the museum that didn't understand this kind of storytelling, that maybe had not even experienced the SF MoMA app. And so it was my job to really get people comfortable with a new form of storytelling, with a new form of a voice, and with this sort of new kind of idea that you could use location-aware technology to create a long-form walk that was not necessarily about just moving to this artwork, to the next artwork, to the next artwork, to learn the sort of institutional extended label copy about that, but actually to create some other kind of story-based experience. So I would say that the very first thing that we did was we had multiple what we call story jams, where we were just talking about the kinds of themes that we could explore in long-form audio and how that might be relevant to both the block galleries. But early on, somebody said something in one of these story jams like, well, you don't have to stay in the block galleries. You could go anywhere you want in the museum, because they were wiring up the whole museum. And that was exciting as a creative person and also terrifying because it's a huge museum with an encyclopedic collection, and the idea of how you were going to tie all those things together was also something that made me a little bit like, ah. But so we had many of these story jams, and the thing that I think moved the dime was that we had a lot of internal advocates in those meetings and establishing trust, even though they trusted each other, coming in from as an outside person, as an outside creative force. I had a lot of authority that I might not have had I been inside the institution, because I could say, I have seen this work elsewhere. Let me show you some real life, like lived experience, and play you some audio that actually sounds very different than what you may have heard in the past. So even though the Nelson team was intentionally looking for a new style and approach to content, they didn't really know what that meant until we got really into the nitty-gritty of brainstorming what it could look like, and that started raising a lot of fear factors. So even though I could say as an outside person, let's listen to this particular sample. Let's talk about how you're reacting to it. And everybody would be like, yes, 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 we want that, we want that, we want that. And then when we talk about applying it to the actual institution's collection, it would be like, no, 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 we don't want that. So that was really the sort of line of risk taking that we were dealing with on a content development side of things. And Melissa and I really had to be like a tag team of superheroes of communication, because it was all about making people feel heard, understanding the fear factor, and then moving forward anyway. Right? So what we did was we had a whole series of these meetings where we had a lot of input, where everybody was hearing what we were coming at the project as creative people, and then we were also soliciting and getting a lot of buy-in. But we went through a very arduous process. We were going to make 2 immersive walks, and then there was another producer that was making a third, as well as making a whole bunch of what we call nearby audios, which were more conventional approaches to interpretation for the permanent collection. So after we did kind of a virtual story jam, and then I actually went to the Nelson and led one in person. After that, we came up with we called together 12 different ideas for themes, and then we presented those 12 ideas to the core team. In that big story jam, we had probably 25 people from all across the institution, and then we narrowed that down to, we presented these 12 ideas to the core team, and then the core team went away and had a great big, I think, long debate, yeah?
Yeah, so we actually voted. Everyone got 3 votes, the 3 you liked the most, and then from there we kind of saw which ones had the most, which was kind of interesting because a couple rose to the top, and then it was like the 4th and 5th one, we could no one could decide. So we had lots of conversations, and we narrowed down to 5, and then we presented those to share with the director, because the director basically said, I'm going to pick the final 2. So then we gave them, we presented the 5 to the museum's director, and then he chose the final 2 for production. So, yeah.
I think one of the important things about that whole process, that from story jam to sort of selection of what we were actually going to make, was something that doesn't happen a lot. There's not usually a lot of pre-production conceptual time to get buy-in from the very beginning, and I think that's something really important to point out about this particular project. We, I don't know how long, maybe it was 6 weeks, maybe it was 6 weeks that we were doing just concepts and development. And what happened was, it started off with this, this sort of idea. The idea got a little bit more solid as I was playing, material that the direction we were gonna try to go in. And we just kept solidifying and solidifying and solidifying. So when we came down to those 5, when they narrowed the 12 ideas down to 5, we did sort of 12 creative briefs. Then when we came up with the 5, we actually chose works in the gallery that would explicate those ideas. And so as we kind of narrowed and made things more tangible, the buy-in got greater and greater and greater. It wasn't just like, okay, well, we kind of all adopted this idea that we sort of get what it is, but we don't really know what it's gonna be, and then we don't hear anything until it shows up in fully produced. And so I think just all those little steps along the way were really important to getting over the fear factor. Go ahead.
So just wanted to walk you through our production a little bit. And something Christine had mentioned earlier was like we were tag teaming a lot of things, and I kind of like to joke that we had two-pronged approaches. So one was that I was, kind of on the inside talking with colleagues and, assuring them, that they were a little nervous. And then I would call Christine and be like, hey, so I just had this conversation with one of our curators and she's a little nervous. So can you, when you next talk to her, like, here's her fears and, can you help address them? And then Christine would come in and address them. So kind of both of us being on the same page, even though we were kind of in two different spots, and being able to address those fears in a tag team approach really helped to get everyone sort of on the same page. And so that, of course, required lots and lots of conversations, and also understanding why our colleagues had those fears, and not saying like, oh, your fears are stupid, like, you should just get over that. Instead being like, no, we totally get that this is, nerve-wracking for you, and kind of we're asking you to come and talk without a script about the work of art off the top of your head, which makes you really nervous, and we get that, but this is the reason why we're doing that. We're going for a more conversational tone of voice. And whenever I talk to you about this work of art, you always say amazing things. You don't need a script. You know what you want to say. And kind of that role of empathy was so important in kind of establishing those relationships of trust and helping to move this forward.
I just have one sort of very specific example of that I think it's one of the finer moments in one of these immersive walks. So I did an interview with one of the curators about a piece, and she actually cried while she was talking about it to me. We both cried because it's a really moving piece, and I was like, hot dog, you never get that on tape. So I wanted to use this moment. It was really powerful. Her storytelling was really powerful, but also just the emotion in her voice was really powerful. And so I included it in a rough voice draft. And I don't know if we even let her hear it. She just saw it on the page. She just saw it on the page. We kind of had this rule that the curators weren't allowed to read the scripts, but except for factual. Like once they got developed, then there was like this sort of fact check aspect. But we were sort of like, trust us as storytellers. We are hearing you. We are going to incorporate. This is going to be founded in actual, specific scholarship, but we're getting at some other kind of story here. So in any case, so she saw Jan's voice gets choked up or something in the script, and she was like, yeah, no, I don't want you to do that. That's I'm shy, and that was really personal, and I'm a voice of authority, and I really want people to understand the piece, and these were all totally legitimate points, but Melissa had a chat with her about that, where she expressed her discomfort. I had a chat with her where she expressed her discomfort. We didn't take it out, and we took out maybe one little tiny thing that she said, but we kept in the emotion. And I went to the museum to do a walkthrough, and she was still saying, I don't want that in. I don't want that in it. We were probably at the like rough cut stage, or maybe we were doing like initial mixes. And I sat down with her in her office, and I said, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and I totally get your professional reputation and this status that you have, but it seems to me, as an outside audio producer, I make a lot of audio tours. I listen to a lot of audio tours. I listen to a lot of podcasts about museums. And, it strikes me that curators actually always come across as these kind of very cerebral people who, and you all kind of do this work because you really care about art. And that somehow always gets lost in these recordings. Like, you actually deeply love what you do, and that letting people hear that a piece of art can move you that powerfully is kind of radical and beautiful and human. And it really kind of makes a great point of like, wow, curators really care about their collection. And she was like, okay, all right, I get it. Okay, all right. It's not that made sense to her. But had we not had multiple conversations where she really felt heard, we couldn't just push back right away. Like we really had to get her there, help her get there.
And we also were doing testing with staff to kind of see if it was working. And I got multiple emails from people on our staff saying, "Oh my God, I started crying when Jan started crying." That was the most moving part of the tour. I was so touched by that. And I started forwarding those emails to her and being like, look at how people are responding. They're responding so positively, and they just respect you more for how deeply you care about your collection. So that was a really interesting thing. And I forgot to say, our other two-pronged approach was sometimes when you're doing something that's a little risky, it's nice to have something a little less risky to help people feel more comfortable with the risk. So the individual audio stops we were doing were a much more like traditional kind of historic approach, where a curator narrates about the piece. And so we had those where they could really feel like they were getting something that they were comfortable with and that they were used to doing. And that sort of eased the way for doing a little bit more experimental of another project. So that was our other of the two-pronged approach.
Take cover behind convention. That was, and then sneak in all of the really creative stuff.
Okay, so our rollout and reception, because we had a really short timeline, we actually ended up having to do a phased rollout. So first we did the individual audio stops, and then we had to roll out the immersive walks later, which wasn't our plan, but sometimes you just have to roll with the hand that's been dealt to you. And we were getting some really positive feedback. So I won't read the comments, but we felt like people were really responding to this new style and kind of different content.
So we're running over our little time, so we'll just quickly, you want to talk about that really fast?
Oh, so just quickly mention what's next. I think the biggest thing about when you're doing risk-taking projects is not letting the momentum die. So you've taken a risk and you've seen it, pay off or fail in certain ways, and then have those conversations and keep building on that momentum. Don't let it die. So we've actually ended up receiving multiple grants to continue to expand our audio content. So that's something that we're working on. And we're also kind of focusing on accessibility and hoping to incorporate some ASL videos into the Detour app as well. So we are sort of taking the risk that we took on this project and then trying to stretch them out and apply them and keep pushing forward.
That's our project. We're handing it over to Nina and Samir now.
Great. Well, I think there are really different projects. Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Do you want to start off talking about how we got to this project?
Who are you?
Oh, I'm Nina Callaway from Antenna again.
I'm Samir. I work at Smithsonian, where my team and I research and produce improvements to the visitor experience across the campus, so all the museums. I dove into the Hirshhorn for a specific reason, and that'll be sort of our bleed into our first slide. So a little background. We ran a full-year study, the largest ever visitor experience study across the Smithsonian. We intercepted 32,000 visitors over the course of a year, 4 contiguous seasons. And Hirshhorn, of course, being part of Smithsonian, we interviewed over 2,500 visitors at the Hirshhorn. And amongst our 19 museums in the National Zoo, Hirshhorn, along with the National Museum of American Indian in New York, were two of the lowest rated museums by visitors when it comes to visitor experience, dwell time, penetration rates on the floors, satisfaction, engagement, et cetera. Along this time as well, we have a new director at the Hirshhorn, very young, very ambitious. Really is visitor-centric, coming off the heels of about a 10-year stretch where we didn't have a lot of Hirshhorn advocacy for the visitor, right? A lot more for the curation, for the academic sides of the house, for the collection, not so much for the visitor. So came over to the Hirshhorn to help fundamentally rewrite the visitor experience from the ground up. Part of this, we know from our research, visitors really needed, as visitors to most art museums tell us around the country, especially Americans, need a little more handholding than those at history or science museums, right? That the content at science and history may be more accessible to a broader public. Certainly contemporary art museums, visitors ask again and again, please help me orient, tell me sort of why I should care or how I can use contemporary art in my daily life, why should I come to or bring my kids to? And so off the cuff, we knew we needed tools to better orient visitors to the Hirshhorn, both thematically, the themes of contemporary art, of course the collection itself, but also physically to the building, to the campus of the Hirshhorn. So part of that plan, that ambition, was to develop a mobile guide. Hirshhorn is 41 years old, and never in its life has it had any visitor tool, any audio guide from the 90s or the 80s, any tour type, and certainly nothing digital on a phone, since phones became smart in the early aughts. So zero. So we set out a plan, found some funding from the board of directors to put together a really sexy video guide. And then sideways, while we're in concept phase for this, Central Smithsonian comes to the Hirshhorn and says, well, all the museums say, we have a partnership with Antenna. We want to pilot an audio guide. And therein lies, I guess, the first risk, is Hirshhorn is sort of seen, maybe by itself, it sees itself this way, or certainly across the campus, as sort of the bad boy on the block amongst Smithsonian's 19 museums. It likes to be a little more renegade. It is contemporary art, after all, and it likes to be a little scruffy, right? I mean, it is scruffy amongst the larger, museums on campus. And as such, the curators, the exhibition head, the director certainly want to be a sort of cut aside. I mean, frankly, every museum wants to be cut aside from every other museum, granted. So people heard the word, specifically the director heard the word Antenna and said, please, we all know Antenna. They can be very sort of usual, institutional. I don't want it. She flat out said, I don't want it. And so there was a lot of risk there in sort of taking on the project and advocating for, well, we need to give them something. We won't be able to have this sexy video guide 2 years out. We need something now. Same time frame, we are preparing for a major blockbuster. You may have heard of it, Yayoi Kusama Infinity Mirrors, which we knew would drive millions of visitors to the museum. And so all eyes would be on the museum February of 2017. We knew this. And not just DC eyes, but sort of global art would be eyes on Hirshhorn. Melissa Chu being the director, her first major push, her first curatorial decision there. So a lot of risk, sort of therein sort of lies, I guess, our first two aspects of risk. A, cannot be a usual. It has to be somewhat groundbreaking, somewhat non-institutional, and pass the litmus test, not only visitors, but of course, donors and museum colleagues.
And I'll add to those risk factors that not only were all the eyes going to be on this Yayoi Kusama, all these visitors coming to experience this for the first time, but because it was this pilot project, we had all 19 other museums, Smithsonians, looking at this project. And because of this blockbuster, it meant we had about 2 months to do this project, which is certainly you can do an audio guide in that time. But when a museum has never done an audio or a multimedia guide before, so defining exactly what that means for that institution, then they want to do something that's a cut aside, so you can't even say, like, we'll just make what this other place did. We want something different, but what different means to me might be not at all what it means to Samir and to the Hirshhorn. And additionally, for a number of reasons, there was very limited staff time. So we had to be efficient in what we were doing and really use Antenna's resources to make something great that fit the brand. And we had to get it right the first time, because with 2 months, there was no time to iterate. There was barely any time to revise a script. I think I was giving Samir can you get this back to me day after tomorrow?
Big risk, no user testing, no prototyping.
No prototyping. So very, very waterfall project. So the first thing that we had to do was really define the project and really get buy-in across the museum that we were all talking the same assignment. So we did an all-day kickoff meeting, and Samir gathered a really great cross-section of the museum to make sure that a wide variety of voices were represented at the table. We listened to a lot of audio, a lot of risk-taking examples from the field, including audio walks, but other examples. And then we borrowed this very waterfall project, this non-iterative project. We borrowed from Agile to really define things. So we got the team started in a really broad-ranging conversation about what could this be, what should this be, and let them talk. And I scribed the keywords that I was hearing on a board. And at a certain point, when I felt like the conversation was getting a little too insular, I wrote up on the board, if you're in this room, you're probably not the target audience, just to remind everybody that what we were talking about. And so then when the conversation sort of came to a close, we gave people markers and we let them, as you guys did, but on a different thing, vote on what this guide should be. And what that does is it prevents the loudest voice in the room from being the most authoritative or the decision maker. But what we did after was discussing what got the votes was informative, but discussing what didn't get the votes was really the most important part of this. So as you can see, the goals that we defined are rather broad-ranging and maybe a little elusive, but really defining that it wasn't an expert curatorial voice and that it wasn't the answers that we were trying to give people, but the questions to ask was really an important thing in the process. We also did a story jam. And because we really wanted this guide to be very, very visitor-centric, we made sure that the people in the room were both art people and non-art people. And we just asked them, what does this piece make you think of? How does this piece make you feel? And what do you want to know about it? And then from there, we defined a number of different approaches that we could take with this guide. Thinking about what you did with Jan, one of the best decisions that we made was we knew we wanted to interview the curators, even though it wasn't going to be this expert curatorial voice, because they do in fact hold a lot of information. We weren't sure exactly how we'd use what we got, but we recorded them in the galleries rather than an impersonal audio booth, which we do for a lot of our clients. And you really sacrifice the sound. It's a lot echoer, it's a lot rawer, but that was okay with the Hirshhorn's scruff.
That's what we wanted.
Yeah, it was okay with the Hirshhorn Scruffy brand, and it really allowed us to help the curator talk about what they emotionally responded to with the artwork. What's my next slide? And then the other decision that we made, because we knew we didn't have time to iterate, was we said, oh gosh, what if we make this audio guide and we get it really wrong, And they're like, this shouldn't be the direction that we go at all. So we said, let's just do it all. Let's take all of our ideas and figure out the best approach for each artwork and have it be really varied. And that way, if they do come back and they say, oh, this approach really didn't work, we're not throwing out the whole project. We're rewriting one or two stops. And so we have everything from the first stop on the tour is visitors just reacting to the artwork. We do have some curator interviews, as I said. We have some unconventional interviewers, like a Santeria high priestess, some artist.
That was very risky.
That was really risky, yeah. And quite frankly, that's one that maybe didn't pay off so well. But, just really thinking about all of these different ways that we could talk about this artwork as part of encouraging visitors to think about how they want to talk about the artwork, because one visitor is gonna, some visitors are like, I loved hearing what all these different voices were saying about this artwork, and other people are like, why am I listening to random visitors? Why do I care what they say? So I think it actually really worked. Yeah, this mix really worked.
It's also, so bleeding from that side to this side, it's also, it was some work, it was some work to convince senior leaders that, well, really the director and chief curator, that young folks today, by that I mean, teens, 20s, maybe early 30s, really care, are interested in the behind the scenes, sort of the museum inside out. And while certainly there will always be an audience who wants that academic, who wants the classic stories of how art is made or what the artist was, ... What about how do you install that very large Basualdo that takes up the entire room and you have to walk around the room? How do you put that in place? the behind the scenes of the museum is interesting, and there was some convincing there. But also we did so with new leaders who, frankly, take risks. So part of it is, I think you have to have a climate in your museum or institution that accepts risk, and you lay out, what will we gain, what will we lose, and we wouldn't lose too much. And the outcome here, frankly, is that it was a success. We surprised the director of the museum. She did not think that we would pull off irreverence the way we did, that we would pull off cheeky or respectful cheekiness and good humor in the way we did so quickly. In fact, it led, not only did we have great success, coming from our visitors, our visitor response, being surprised to hear from, say, security officers what their take is of Big Man, one of the iconic pieces on view at the Hirshhorn, but also internal, not only the museum director, but the curatorial teams, the education teams. So the internal success probably was more successful, so successful, in fact, I mentioned earlier that when we started off this project, we were in the process of convening the idea of a new video guide. By the time this project concluded, we had put that out to market. We were looking for new firms, and we have actually engaged Antenna. On the success of the audio guide, we've engaged Antenna along with two other vendors as a three-party sort of triad to develop a very new state-of-the-art, we hope groundbreaking mobile experience that will launch in May of 2018. So we did take some risks. We've learned some things. We won't do some things that we didn't do this project. But essentially, we sold the director of the museum on it such that she signed off on using the team again for a new, bigger, and bolder product.
Speaking of building on your momentum, I think you had these things in place, but I think just capitalizing on a moment of success in order to convince your stakeholders that risk is worth it because this one paid off. I think, we'll talk again about other things, but.
And also just in outcomes, this app, I don't think we mentioned this, but this video guide was for Masterworks, the permanent show of the Hirshhorn that was up simultaneous with the Kusama show. We also, because of visitor requests, coupled together, and I'll say that pretty honestly, coupled together a multimedia guide for Kusama, knowing there will be hundreds of thousands of visitors wanting something, and they were side by side. And the Masterworks was so much better. And visitors, actually, we failed at the Kusama guide because it was coupled together and sort of classic, a video here, some excerpts here, some wall labels here. So side by side, the riskier one was actually far more successful.
Okay, so as I said, we're really providing these case studies as a roadmap for ways that you can maybe goad or control or coax your colleagues into other projects, riskier projects, whatever that may mean for your institution. So in conversations together, really comparing our experiences and our institutional types, we came together with some shared principles that really stood out to us. One thing that I really loved was setting goals and anti-goals. That was some helpful nomenclature that Nina introduced and we had done before. We don't want to be the Met timeline. We don't want to be Wikipedia in other contexts, and that can be just as helpful of a signpost as goals. We talked a lot about managing expectations. One thing that we noticed was you have fears that kind of bubble up regardless of prior conversations. As things get real, people get nervous for different reasons. So that's something to keep in mind. And some of our guiding principles for actual in-process is again, this idea that it's always iterative. You may have initial buy-in, but you do need to sustain it. You have to be your project's cheerleader. Everybody's got 300 million things they're working on, so yours may not be top of mind. So as the content developer or otherwise the champion for the project, you do need to rah-rah it and keep it top of mind for everyone. And related to that is the idea of fostering constant dialogue about the project. In through the process of the Nelson Atkins reinstallation, we really did, we were transparent about failure and that this is possible and what would that mean if these projects don't pay off. Fortunately, we had a funder that was open to that. He just knew he wanted something tech related that would fly to the moon, and so we're like, okay. But I know that those stakes aren't always the same for every project.
I think one thing that was on one of those slides that I just wanted to say from my own personal experience was that Ann Manning, the director of education, and who else had gone to SF MoMA? Catherine Fitter. Yeah, there were a bunch of senior leaders that had this experience and had the vision for the experience, didn't really know how to pull it off, but they were internal advocates and they had enough gravitas within the institution that it's really important to identify those people that will continue to sustain buy-in amongst the rest of their kind of level, because it's really easy for all the project team to believe, but that advocacy, finding someone else to be that advocate inside the institution is really, really important, I think.
Great, so we've got about 15 more minutes for conversation. I've got some questions that I'd like to ask the panel, but also open to all of y'all out there. So the first question is, to what end are we taking risks? I think that they're failing forward, fail fast and fail furious, or whatever that is, has become such jargon in our field, and I think it's easy to forget that it's a means to an end. So I'd like to hear y'all's take on that.
Talk about to what end.
To what end is risk taking?
Yeah, what's the point?
I don't know.
I mean, I do think it's important to know what you're after, right? Like what are your outcomes? Because I think we've all had the conversation about technology for technology's sake. Nobody really wants to be accused of that, and so we really. I mean, I think I don't want to talk about Berkeley because it's not really my story to tell. But there was another immersive walk that was being developed that didn't really work out, and I'm not sure it ever even got published. Did it?
No, so one of them didn't even move forward, and the other one is still in production. And I think the interesting thing about the question, to what end does your institution take risk, is that sometimes different people in the institution might have different outcomes or goals. So, we had a funder who wanted to do something kind of big and splashy, more of the, what we might call tech for tech's sake. And that was kind of their reason for wanting to take risk, whereas our reason for wanting to take risks was to try to really create meaningful content and better experience for our visitor. And that's the reason why we wanted to take risks, because, we were like, if we fail, at least we can say we tried, and hopefully we'll learn something from that. And if we succeed and we really create a meaningful experience for our visitors, that's amazing. So sometimes, even though people might have different sort of outcomes or expectations, kind of seeing where those converge and come together so that you can push something forward.
Great, thank you. One thing I noted as I was reviewing y'all's slides is that you guys are talking about a lot of successes, and I want to hear a little bit more about failures you encountered within these projects.
So as I mentioned, we were trying to launch 4 immersive walks for the opening. We only launched 2, and the 2 we were working on with another firm really kind of fell through. And so that was definitely a failure. And also, I'll say that we're getting really positive feedback from the people who have used the immersive walk. But our pickup rate for audio hasn't really increased very much from what it had been historically with our old audio guide. So we were really hoping to get more users and to have more people kind of taking it. And the people who are taking it are really enjoying it, but there's not necessarily more people taking it than before. So this was another reminder that, like many museum projects, we spend all this money on this amazing project, and it's like, oh, the field of dreams, if we build it, they will come. No, they will not. We really, 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 really need to spend some money on marketing. So learning that we need to market that better, And that's something that we're trying to grow from, and, was a failure on our end. Also, in trying to push this out on such a short timeline, we didn't really have a marketing plan in place before we pushed it out, and that was a mistake.
I'll say that, we had I mentioned that we did have these unconventional interviews, and we did have the ambition to have more unconventional interviews. As I mentioned, this woman who talked about, I'll call it Santeria because that's the term most people know, she really sort of disagreed with some of the existing curatorial interpretations of the work. She didn't want to use the term Santeria because that was insulting to her. And she just put up a lot of no's. So because of the short time frame of the project, we maybe didn't identify exactly the right unconventional interviews to do. It would have been nice to have a little more time there. And then I think we could have done more objects. We could have, there's always, you see what you could have done. But I think, we learned a lot for this next project.
I think also just in terms of being an audio producer working in the Detour platform, the software was new, the tech was new, the building had just been mapped by Apple. There was a lot of there were a lot of failures along the way, just trying to get this damn thing on its feet. The software's still fairly, it's still being developed. It's not super stable. So there was a lot of time that went into just the kind of dealing with that side of the tech. The back end was not so easy, and I think just it wasn't a failure, but there was a lot of frustration and a lot of challenges along the way.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions on the floor. Does anybody have? Yes, in the back, Julene. Hi. So Julene's question for the recording is, what does a story jam look like?
Well, it's a really fun day with a lot of different people, and it depends on obviously what the project is, but it's really a workshop that we lead to pull out themes, characters, sound forward approaches to, we're just talking about in the audio context. So we have this at SF MoMA, where I also do some projects. We have this, I'm not trying to throw any curators under the bus, but we have this story jam mantra, which is Plan C. The C is for curatorial voice. So what's Plan A, what's Plan B, what's Plan B.5, and then we'll go to Plan C. So the idea is, who else can tell a story about this? And so it's really like a guided brainstorming session around not just, and it's not, so often there are curators actually at SF MoMA, there are always curators in the room participating in the story jam, helping us figure out who else we could talk to besides them. So because they understand that they want people to be as engaged as possible. So that's really, is that helpful at all? Yeah. It's usually a cross-departmental, Nina led a great one that really involved a lot of people from a lot of people who weren't even going to be involved in the audio guide in the end, but who needed to be heard at that first. They have great ideas too.
Yeah, I'll say this sort of goes back to my slide where we were asking, like, what does this piece make you feel? What does it make you think of? There's a lot of, okay, crazy idea, but, there's a lot of things you throw out. But it's not just brainstorming about the larger ideas, it's also getting down to some of the nitty gritty.
Yeah, front. So again, for the recording, she's asking, what is an immersive walk?
It's an excellent question. You want me to take it? I'll take that. So with the evolution of location-aware technology, where an app can know where you are at all times in a building, you can start to thread together long-form, like half-hour walks where the visitor chooses this, let's say, this theme that they're interested in. So one of the immersive walks we made for The Nelson is called Through the Eyes of Love, and it uses the concept of the sort of messiness of human connection. It's like listening to a podcast about that, but along the way, as you're guided through the museum and content that's specific to artworks that are explicating the ideas inside the story get pushed to you, so you can move at your own pace. You press play, and then you never deal with your device again. So the idea of an immersive walk is that you stay in the story for the whole half hour. You're not popping in and out. The visitor is not necessarily in control. They don't have agency over what they're listening to when. They're actually guided. It's a guided walk through a collection or a space or a historic site or an outdoor environment, using basically location tags to deliver you the content right at the moment you need it, right when you're looking at the thing that is being referred to in your ears.
Yeah, and I'll add to that one challenge we've run into at the Nelson Atkins is clearly communicating to visitors the difference between the more traditional random access audio, which dovetails more nicely with an organic visit, and the immersive walks. And so we are planning another phase of marketing rollout that and some user testing that'll help communicate that idea more clearly. So we may deviate from what Detour calls immersive walks and maybe call it a guided tour or podcast something. Mm-hmm.
Creative fiction? Is someone inventing a story that just works of art pop into, or is it about the works of art?
It's a great question. The answer is yes. It's all those things. It can be all those things. So SF MoMA has an amazing immersive walk that's entirely fiction. There is nothing actually interpretive about it whatsoever. It just uses the museum as a space for this very strange story to unfold. Many of the immersive walks that I've made at SF MoMA and at the Nelson involve personalities. So for example, I did an immersive walk with someone who works in a think tank, who's a futurist, and she looks at artworks from the pop art minimalist era and talks about envisioning the future. And the whole thing is basically the story of the way that she sees the world, the way that it's her point of view. It's a very subjective take on the artworks that you're walking through. But the question that she's posing is, what does the future look like from where we stand right now? What did it look like back then? We're looking at stuff that the right now was the future of back then, and so what's that going to happen? So it's a way to sort of thematically tie together works. You could explore it in a fictional way, or you could explore it through a particular lens. There's another immersive walk we did with a cognitive scientist, and the whole point of the walk is like, what does the brain do when you don't understand something? And so we picked the most difficult works in the museum to stand in front of along the way. And this guy just talks about the value of not understanding something. And the whole walk is about basically getting people comfortable with being uncomfortable by not understanding. So sometimes it can explore just one question. Sometimes it can explore a personal experience. It's like short fiction. I would say it's like short. It's not like short fiction.
But I would say, Christine, like your Through the Eyes of Love tour has close looking, background story, art details in it, but it's told through this subjective narrator, so it doesn't feel like a classroom or like a traditional audio guide. It feels like your friend is there talking to you.
Mm-hmm. It's like you have this story and then also kind of art content built into it. So, Christine was very careful working with the curators to ensure everything she was including was accurate. But the purpose of the walk wasn't to be accurate or to tell you the art historical history of it. Any other questions?
Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, the question is, do we have analytics now that tell us which of our various efforts are most successful? We do not yet, because we are installing a new, first ever cafe in the lobby this winter. So after that's in place, it'll be the fifth major upending effort that we've made. And then, so next spring, summer, we will run a comparative study to understand how we move the needle, if we move the needle.
I'll just say that anecdotally, it's really interesting. Like some people really respond to one take or the other, but what people respond to overall is the variety that they say, like, I liked that it was different for each artwork.
Well, that concludes our time. We're going to let you out a couple minutes early to get to your SIG meetups, but thank you all so much.
What to say?